All right. Can you hear me all right over there? Cool. Welcome. Good evening. Hello. We are back at it. I thought we might take a week off, but nah, we'll soldier ahead. Daniel. We're doing Daniel right now. We'll follow it with Hebrews afterwards, which actually seems quite fitting. Sticking with an Old Testament theme and then a New Testament, Old Testament kind of theme. But Daniel is a fun little book. It's very misunderstood, very misappropriated. A lot of weird things come out of Daniel. Actually, they don't come out of Daniel. People pull them out of Daniel, and they go in weird places. But Daniel is one of the books in the prophets. He deals with, just in general, he is a young boy essentially. I mean, he's a teenager who is taken from Judah by Babylon. This is before Babylon comes in to destroy Jerusalem, and just conquer it. So about 3 years before that, Babylon comes in, takes a bunch of stuff, takes a lot of people, the first group of exiles, and Daniel is one of them. Just a teenager at that time, so he ends up in Babylon, and basically will spend most of his life there. And he is there all the way through until the people of Judah are sent back or allowed to come back to their homes. So Daniel deals with some narratives, some events that happen in the course of Daniel's life, and then some visions and some dreams that he has. And those obviously get fun. The visions and dreams are apocalyptic literature, meaning revelatory, not like, if we remember from Revelation, apocalyptic does not mean end of the world. It just means revealed. So these are visions, things that are revealed to Daniel, and as such, we read them similar to the way that we read Revelation, symbolic, having to do with whatever. So anyway, he deals with a lot of prophecy. He's one of the first of the prophets to date all of his happenings and visions, because he goes through and in this year reign of this king, this year reign of this king. So, which is really cool because we get an exact kind of, not exact, fairly accurate idea of when these things were happening. And we have extra biblical sources to pin down the reigns because they agree, about when these kings were reigning. So this is a good thing because we do get an idea of when things were happening, what's going on. The bad part of this is that because there's a lot of dates and times and numbers involved, people will take Daniel and come up with all sorts of fun stuff. And this number, it's the seventh year of this reign, and 7 is a significant number. So this means that in the 7th year of this president, and then this number comes up, and he talks about, and there's this animal, and it's just they just kind of take it and run with it. And we'll cover a little bit. We should get through chapter 1 tonight. Has anybody heard about the Daniel plan, the Daniel diet? Yeah. If you haven't, good. Don't worry about it. It's a diet plan based on the book of Daniel.
One of those things I don't worry about.
Oh yeah, no, this is not something to worry about. If you don't know about it, don't Google it. Don't worry about it. It's kind of ridiculous. Not the diet itself. I don't even know about I think it's mostly vegetables anyway. So as far as diets go, it's whatever. But the idea behind it is kind of silly. So we'll touch on that. So there are some weird things that come out of it. But people, they want to look at any kind of apocalyptic literature and try to figure out, this is what's going to happen. This is how it's going to happen. All Scripture points to who? Jesus. So guess what Daniel is all going to be about?
Jesus.
Shocking. My goodness. You can all go home. You figured it out. The whole book. What more do I need to tell you? What more do you need from this than it's about Jesus? And we're going to get it right from the get-go. And that's what it is. There are some other themes, but ultimately, Jesus. All right. Daniel was well regarded among his people and among the people of Babylon. Rose to a great deal of prominence. Served the kings of Babylon. He was loyal to them. But he never abandoned his faith. So he was a good guy who really fit in with a lot of stuff, and we're going to see what is behind that. But the kind of significant thing about Daniel is even though he kind of plugged into Babylon and their life and just the way of things, he never lost his faith. He didn't whatever.
Didn't
The brain.
sell out.
We need those desserts is what we need. That sugar to kickstart the brain. Okay. So the structure of Daniel is actually very nicely divided up. The first 9 chapters, there's 12 chapters total. The first 9 each present a different section. Chapters 1 through 6 are narratives, and each chapter is a different narrative. So boom, 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 boom. Get 6 different narratives. Then 7 through 9 are visions, 3 visions. And then chapters 10 through 12 are a single vision. So we got 6 narratives, 4 visions. Easy peasy. We'll get it done in no time. Certainly before Christmas. He breaks apart chapters 1 through 6 are the narrative. He describes himself and kind of the narrative in the third person. But the visions, he describes himself in the first person. Which, I mean, kind of makes sense. If he's describing a narrative, kind of laying down a history. And so it's like third person, these are the events. But when it's the visions, he's speaking personally. Like, I saw this, and God showed this to me. So that's why that happens. So let's see, what do we want to talk about there? The 6 narratives, so Daniel 1 through 6, the narrative section actually happens in chronological order, which is nice, because as if you're following along with our morning prayer, nothing's in chronological order. We're jumping all around. Even in Chronicles, where it's like this happens, and then you jump right back to before Chronicles, and it's just it's a mess. But this chapters 1 through 6 happen in chronological order. The visions are presented actually chronologically, except that they occurred kind of intermixed previous to, well, at least a couple of them. So chapters 7 and 8, the visions in 7 and 8 actually happen technically between chapters 4 and 5. And then the remaining visions are all later anyway. These are just minor details, nothing you have to worry about. It is written in both Hebrew and Aramaic. There's not a lot written in Aramaic in Scripture. There's some, a little bit. I mean, all Old Testament. But it is both of these. It has both of these going on here. So, Hebrew and Aramaic are related. They're very similar. Aramaic is Jesus and the disciples, and during that time, more than likely, they were speaking Aramaic. They weren't speaking Hebrew. They were speaking Aramaic, similar to Hebrew. They're writing in Greek, so there's that fun. But back in this time, so in the time of, let's say, pre-exile, you've got the people of Israel who are primarily speaking and writing Hebrew. This is their language. Hebrew is the language of the people of Israel. Aramaic is a related language that it's related because you go back to, you get the sons of Noah, I think, and then their sons. Somewhere along those lines you get Aram, and he goes off and develops his people in the Arameans, and then you get their language, Aramaic. Well, it's coming from the same source, the language that they had been speaking that became Hebrew. So you've got shared roots between the two. So very similar. Aramaic is kind of, at that time, becoming sort of the default language or the go-to language for most of the Middle East. So a lot of them in that region are speaking Aramaic. By the time the exile happens, so you got all the people of Judah and some smattering of other people brought into Babylon. This is their language. Well, post-exile, you find a lot of Aramaic words and dialects are kind of trickling into their language. I mean, which makes sense because they were there for 70, 80 years, right? I mean, a good generation lived there, and they had to learn Aramaic in the language of Babylon. So Aramaic kind of starts to trickle into Scripture a bit, and you see it here and there in some Aramaic loan words and whatnot. So by the time you get to Jesus in that time, they're speaking mainly Aramaic. So like if you watch Passion of the Christ, and they're speaking Aramaic. Very similar. The fun thing is that so this is written in, Akkadian, I think? Akkadian cuneiform. This is written in Hebrew, obviously. All the Aramaic in the Bible, in the Old Testament, is written in Hebrew. So it uses Hebrew letters to write it out. So, like, if you don't really know, you could be just reading along in Hebrew and sort of like, it's all Hebrew to you. But there is some Aramaic in here. We'll talk a little bit about some of the fun stuff about Akkadian and all that later. All right. Okay. Other fun stuff. Just to kind of prime the pump here. Is you've got chapters 1 through 6 are the narrative. Visions. You got 7 through 12 are the visions, right? Fun thing about that is that the narrative section, the intro, is written in Hebrew. The rest is in Aramaic. Visions, it's opposite. The introductory vision, so chapter 7, is written in Aramaic. The rest is in Hebrew. It's a fun little parallel. There's a chiastic structure to the whole book, and we can flesh that out. We'll look at that probably at the end. But very interesting how it bookends and just kind of flips it, where we intro with Hebrew, get into Aramaic, intro Aramaic, get into Hebrew. Just fun stuff. There won't be a quiz. Maybe there will be. Maybe we'll do something different. I don't know. So anyway, there are some major themes in Daniel. Obviously, the Messiah, that there is a Messiah coming. He refers to him as the Son of Man. Interesting characteristics about this Messiah. He is a king who is both divine and human. He brings his people into the kingdom of God. His death and atonement are the basis of a new covenant God will make with his people. Who does this sound like? Yeah. Sounds like Jesus, right? Oh, okay. But beyond Jesus always being the focal point, Daniel will bring out that God is the protector of his people, that the false gods, false idols are useless, and brings out the power of God. And a very important theme that is very useful for us is how to live faithfully in a pagan world or in a pagan society. Because this is exactly what Daniel's dealing with. He's trying to remain faithful in a society that is really trying to impose upon him pagan beliefs. So a lot of the stuff that we're going to talk about, especially throughout the narratives and what we see through Daniel, is how to maintain your integrity in faith and not fall down into apostasy. All right, any questions so far?
Wait, what's the timeline here?
Oh, okay, so we're looking at 605 is when, that's a different thing. The fall of Jerusalem was 587, so we're in the, BC is always confused, so late 500s, which in BC would be the upper limit, which is farther, and so the whole thing, so what we're looking at is 600 to 500 BC. This covers basically all the events that's going on.
And when was David's time? About 1000 BC? Or?
David's time would be maybe 1,000. No, not. Trying to think. That's a good question. Somebody online who's at your computer, look that up.
Yeah, I was just trying to get some perspective.
I always struggle with BC because my brain just always forgets to be like, oh wait, it goes backwards, or it goes. The later you get, the lower the numbers go, and then for whatever reason, I love math. I'm great with numbers. BC screws me up all the time. So yeah, this is the fall of Jerusalem. So it's in this window. All right. We ready? Sweet. Let's go. Chapter 1, verses 1 through 2. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, with some of the vessels of the house of God. Sorry, I got a comment here and I got distracted. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand with some of the vessels of the house of God. And he brought them to the land of Shinar, to the house of his God, and placed the vessels in the treasury of his God. All right. David was born in 1040 BC. So there you go. Spot on. I was going to say 900. What's 100 years? That's somewhere in there. All right. So little background here. So we're going to go to 605 BC. Okay, we're going to jump back even a little bit further. All right. A little background here on Nebuchadnezzar and Jehoiakim. So we're going to look at 2 Kings 23. This is not on the slides, by the way. 2 Kings 23, verses 29 through 35. Just go read it for you. In his days, Pharaoh Necho, king of Egypt, went up to the king of Assyria to the river Euphrates. King Josiah went to meet him, and Pharaoh Necho killed him at Megiddo as soon as he saw him. And his servants carried him dead in a chariot from Megiddo and brought him to Jerusalem and buried him in his own tomb. And the people of the land took Jehoahaz, the son of Josiah, and anointed him and made him king in his father's place. Jehoahaz was 23 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 3 months in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Hamutal, the daughter of Jeremiah of Libnah. And he did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, according to all that his fathers had done. And Pharaoh Necho put him in bonds at Riblah in the land of Hamath, that he might not reign in Jerusalem, and laid on the land a tribute of 100 talents of silver and a talent of gold. And Pharaoh Necho made Eliakim, the son of Josiah, king in the place of Josiah his father, and changed his name to Jehoiakim. But he took Jehoahaz away, and he came to Egypt and died there. And Jehoiakim gave the silver and the gold to Pharaoh, but he taxed the land to give the money according to the command of Pharaoh. He exacted the silver and the gold of the people of the land from everyone according to his assessment to give it to Pharaoh Necho. So, you've got... Oh, I'm going to spell Pharaoh wrong. I always spell Pharaoh wrong. We'll just call him Necho. So he does away with King Josiah and eventually puts Jehoiakim in charge. He's the son of Josiah, one of the sons of Josiah. So Jehoiakim, who is king of Judah at the time of Babylon's conquest, he is put in place. He is made king by Egypt. Okay, so he has got some, foreign entanglements with Egypt, and has kind of backed or has selected Egypt as kind of they're in cahoots, and they're going to be providing some military might. So they're paying tribute to all this. Well, this does not end well when Babylon comes a knocking and they defeat Egypt. Not too good when your alliances are defeated soundly. So Jehoiakim is a vassal essentially of Egypt. Babylon comes in, and they're like, all right. So they bind up Jehoiakim and take him back to Babylon briefly. Now they do send him back to Judah to reign for 3 years, but likely to they bring him to be like, okay, guess who's in charge now? Guess who's getting your money now? All right, new bosses, right? So Jehoiakim is placed back in charge, but now at the behest of Babylon. And what happens is he eventually turns against Babylon, and nobody turns against Babylon. So they come in later and they take him, and that's when Jerusalem falls and all sorts of bad things happen. So that's what we got going on there. So let's see. We could talk about Okay. Oh, we got time. So just as little interest point here. In the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar comes in and besieges it. Okay. So the third year of King Jehoiakim's reign. Potential conflict here with Jeremiah. Because in Jeremiah 25, he says that the fourth year of King Jehoiakim's reign was Nebuchadnezzar's first year. So here, Nebuchadnezzar is already king in the third year. In Jeremiah, he says, oh, Nebuchadnezzar is king in the fourth year. So red flags start going up everywhere. And like, there's a conflict in the scriptures. Oh, there's a conflict. Oh, well, you can't trust scriptures. This is actually one of those really easily solved kind of things, because there were two popular methods of recording the ruling years of a king. Shockingly, Jeremiah's usage uses what we call a non-accession year, which means if a king began his reign in the middle of a year, that first partial year was counted. So he started reigning halfway through. 3 years later, Nebuchadnezzar is king, so they say, in the fourth year of his reign. Well, guess what Babylon does, and what the way of counting it in Babylon? They don't include the partial year. And we have a lot of records of this. So Nebuchadnezzar, or Jehoiakim, becomes king halfway through the year. 3 years later, Nebuchadnezzar comes in. According to Babylon, he's only been reigning for 3 years, because they don't count the partial year. This is very well attested to and recorded stuff. So there's no conflict. And I only bring it up because there's a lot of stuff, and Lord help me with Chronicles. There's so many, I don't even have time in a day to point out all the little discrepancies in the naming of things. In that people in different sections might have slightly different names. Well, they're spelled differently. And it's like, well, it's the same guy, but it's spelled differently. Well, it's because of this. Or there's all sorts of reasons why there's little things here and there. But there aren't any conflicts with it. It's kind of like, I had a minor crisis of faith when I was a little kid. When, because you grow up, and when did Jesus, how many days until Jesus rose from the dead, right? The third day, right? So I'm like, all right, he was dead for 3 days. And then I started doing the math. I'm like, wait a second. He wasn't in the tomb for 3 days. Because I'm like, well, Friday afternoon to Saturday afternoon to Sunday morning. That's like 2 days, maybe. Like 48 hours. What? And then I'm like, oh my God, what's going on? And, I'm thinking like, oh God, it's all. Oh. And then, and my pastor lovingly pointed out, on the third day he rose. So Friday, Saturday, Sunday, the third day. I was like, oh, okay. So there's always answers and reasons for these things. So don't be rattled. And believe me, in the thousands of years that we've had Scripture, every possible thing has come up, and there's been answers for it all. So this is all very well attested to. All right. So Babylon comes in, Nebuchadnezzar comes in, besieges Jerusalem, takes some of the vessels of the house of God and puts them in the house of his God, right? So this is a huge kind of, this would be very demoralizing for the people of Judah. The sacred vessels of the temple, this was a big deal. This was a huge part of their religious life. And Nebuchadnezzar just comes in and takes it and throw it in mine. Big deal. Very demoralizing. But notice in verse 2, who did it? Nebuchadnezzar? The Lord. The Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand with some of the vessels of the house of God. God actually allowed the temple to be plundered, to have his things profaned, which is going to bring into this, this ongoing theme of God is in charge, no matter how bad it looks. And even when things happen where you think, oh, how could it possibly happen? How could God allow somebody, an unclean pagan king, come in and take the precious stuff from the temple out and defile it by putting it in? It's like, you know what? God has a plan.
That wasn't the first time it took the Ark of the Covenant.
Well, yeah. These things had happened. But it is pointedly that God allows it to happen. In fact, he gives it. It's not even just God allowed it, but the Lord gave. I mean, and even the imagery is, here you go. Take it, please. Which, in a way would be shocking to the people, but in another way of looking at it, it's like, why does he allow it? Because of their sin. Because the people have turned away from God. And so he's saying, like, look, you have turned away from me. This will all be taken away from you. And in fact, even the threat of exile the point was, turn to me, turn back to me, repent, return to me. So you think like, okay, I've allowed I've allowed Nebuchadnezzar to come in and take your king. I've allowed the stuff to be taken from our temple. All right, are you going to turn to me? What do you think the answer was? No. Absolutely not. They don't. So this is all part of his plan. He's got it. It's all in his control. But it just doesn't seem to be. All right, next slide, verses 3 through 7. Then the king commanded Ashpenaz, his chief eunuch, to bring some of the people of Israel, both of the royal family and of the nobility, youths without blemish, of good appearance and skillful in all wisdom, endowed with knowledge, understanding, learning, and competent to stand in the king's palace, and to teach them the literature and language of the Chaldeans. The king assigned them a daily portion of the food that the king ate and of the wine that he drank. They were to be educated for 3 years, and at the end of that time, they were to stand before the king. Among these were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah of the tribe of Judah. And the chief of the eunuchs gave them names. Daniel he called Belteshazzar, Hananiah he called Shadrach, Mishael he called Meshach, and Azariah he called Abednego. Good old Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. All right, so takes captives, but only the best, the best of them. So from the royal family, nobility, many reasons for this. And taking it from the royalty, nobility and the royal family is essentially the way these things go. How it's all goes down from the family. Basically, taking away the ability for the royal lineages to continue, so that there's no the next generation of Judah's leaders are gone. The ones that they'd be grooming, the best and brightest, gone. Positioning the best and the brightest to now be loyal to Babylon. I mean, he brings them in. Now, granted, it's pretty forced. It's not like it's like, hey, welcome. This is paradise. It's like, no, you're going to do this. But he feeds them from his own table, the king's table. Gives them positions in the palace, teaches them. So while they are forcibly removed, he's positioning them and giving them status and treating them in such a way to basically buy their loyalty. The idea being, if you project ahead when more exiles come in, well, hey, look, here's those great guys from the best families, the best and brightest of Judah, and look, they're already assimilated into Babylon's culture. They know the language. They're my gosh, look at how well they're treated. It is helpful. If you want to have a kind of to put down any possible rebellion when you're bringing in exiles, maybe best to show that, like, hey, don't worry, things are going to be fine. No, you're going to have to give up your God and your way of life and everything else, but otherwise it'll be fine. A little bit of honey in the vinegar there. So pick the best. 3 years of training, so this was a big deal. Back to Akkadian. Oh, I erased it. Anyway, Akkadian is a syllabic written language. So think Japanese, hiragana, katakana. It's all based on syllables, whereas ours are consonants. So does anybody know Japanese? Okay. I know extremely little.
I used to know 2 words. My husband knew it.
Gozaimashita. Yes. I've told you that story, right? My learning Japanese?
Yeah.
Okay. God. I was going to be a pastor to a Japanese community, because the cheating way to get ordained was to go into the ethnic certification program, and you didn't technically have to be the ethnicity. You just had no language. I'm like, ooh, I've always wanted to learn Japanese. So I started learning Japanese and I took classes at this Japanese cultural community center. It was, mid-20s in a class with like first and second graders. In our Christmas play, we all had to sing this Japanese song. There's all these little kids, and then there's me. Oh, God. I think we have pictures. We don't have video, thank God. But basically, so like, ka, ki, ke, ku, ko, sa, shi, se, su. So you've got, and then so Japanese has hiragana, which is Japanese syllable pairs. They've got katakana, which is the same ones but written differently, and those are loan words, foreign loan words. It's a whole thing. But basically, you've got a main set of consonants that are paired with vowel sounds. So when you're learning the basic alphabet, it's kaki, keiko, ko, sashi, se, su, so. And so the easy way to know if you're dealing with a Japanese name or word is it's always going to be groups of these consonants, sometimes ends with an N. But like sushi. Sushi. 2 consonant pairs. I'm blanking on any Japanese words here. Anyway. They're syllabic pairs. So this kind of, in a way, makes things a little bit easier sometimes because it's just pairs of sounds. It's no alphabet and weird. I mean, look at English. It's like we only have 26 letters. That's easy, right? Sure. These are syllabic pairs, so it's like, oh, it's a piece of cake. Except when you've got a lot of them. And Akkadian and the way it was written was in cuneiform, so it was, it looks different than Hebrew. You had hundreds of these syllabic pairs or syllabic groupings to learn. So once the language starts to get more and more complicated and there's more, it just grows. Kind of like, that's why it's hard to learn for us, for Western, thinking and the way we're brought up with English. Japanese, Chinese, these are difficult languages to learn just because you have to learn symbols and so many of them and the way these things pair up, and it's challenging. That's what they were learning, essentially. So they were learning ancient Middle Eastern Japanese. Is the best way to describe it that I know of. So this is the challenge that they're dealing with. So 3 years to learn all this stuff. Now, of course, this is also ways to filter out the Hebrew culture. Get the Judah out of you. You're learning our language. You're learning our writing. You're eating our food. We are trying to get it all out. We're making you Babylonians. To the point that they even get Babylonian names. We're not even calling you your Jewish name, or it's not Jewish at that point, Judean name. We're calling you by your new Babylonian name. So if you look at, well, I'm not going to write them. If you look at the 4 names, Daniel, Mishael, Azariah, and Hananiah, you've got 2 of them that have El in them, so Daniel, Daniel, El is at the end of that one. Mishael, El is at the end of that one. El is a general Hebrew word for God. So they always have names that kind of, not always, but often, my God is my this, my God is my that, has a God in there. Yah is another one. So El, when you see El in a Hebrew word, thinking God. If you see Yah or Yah, that is short for Yahweh. Okay? So Hananiah, Yahweh. Azariah, Yahweh. You've got that kind of built into their names. So it makes it even a little bit more so when they get these Babylonian names that they're stripping, they're stripping God out of their very names. Okay. Now the interesting thing about the way the Babylonian names are presented here is that the names are actually kind of a corrupted form, and what I mean by that is they're not exactly lining up with what a Babylonian name would be, and they're very similar to referencing Babylonian gods, but they've been corrupted to the point where it's like the idea there is that Daniel has recorded these Babylonian names, but messed them up a little bit, and has just tweaked them a little bit to kind of take away a little bit of that, the pagan god name. So you've got Shadrach, which is kind of a corruption of Shadur Marduk. Marduk is one of the Babylonian gods. So instead of Marduk, Shadrach, it's kind of a harder K sound at the end and just sort of deforms it a little bit. Meshach is likely a corruption of Mushalim Marduk. So again, you get this kind of Marduk is corrupted in the name. Abednego is, scholars pretty much agree that it's a corruption of Arad Nebu, which means servant of Nebu, one of the Babylonian gods. So he's changing the names a little bit as kind of a subtle like, oh, you want to give me your names? All right.
So, question.
Yes.
Would the guys actually have gone by those names that you just mentioned? But this is Daniel saying, I'm not going to write that.
Yeah.
Good for him.
Yeah. And you'll notice throughout the narrative that when they're being addressed by the Babylonians, they're using their Babylonian names. But when they're amongst each other or referring to, then they kind of go back to their Hebrew names. So the cool thing there is that the Babylonian view is we're taking away your Hebrew names and we're giving you Babylonian ones and we're taking away your God. But Daniel has this nice little subtle okay, you can change our names. He doesn't make a big deal about it. He doesn't you'll never take our name. He's like, okay, fine. Of course, when he writes about it, he's like, kind of very subtle in his rebellion there. But in this, we see a nice little lesson: how to live a life in a pagan, how to live a life of a faithful person in a pagan world. Choose your battles. Because what we're going to get next is the whole thing about eating the food, and here's where Daniel is like, wait a second, we need an accommodation. Well, the names, would seem like, well, good Lord, look at, I guess it's not so big anymore, the war on Christmas. Every time, people, you can't say Merry Christmas anymore. And there's a certain subset of Christians who are very adamant about this, is like, we have to say Christmas, and anybody who says we have to say Happy Holidays, we can't do this, this is a road too far. The Daniel lesson is like, so say Happy Holiday. Who cares? It's like, is this really the battle you want to fight? Is this the one is this the hill you're gonna die on? Honestly, the Easter Bunny is more offensive than saying Happy Holidays. But even that, there's even history behind that where it's like, it's no big deal. So yeah, and even this is completely, I've had tons of people freak out over that because, you're clearly, it's supposed to be Christmas and you're Xing out Christ. Oh, it's terrible. Except that's a Chi, and that's actually has been a traditional, very abbreviation of Christ. So even when you say Xmas, you're really saying Christmas. So anyway, the lesson being, choose your battles. The naming is not a big deal. They don't care about the names. It's like, call me whatever you want. It's like when people, should I call you Pastor McCoy, Pastor Sean Mike? Whatever you like. I don't care. I've been called a lot of nasty stuff in my life, and you know what? I answer to it all. There's like 3 people in my life who have insisted on calling me Father Sean. I'm like, you know what? Knock yourself out. Fine. Some guys are like, adamant, no, you must not call me that. Like, did not learn the lesson of Daniel. Choose your battles, okay? And that is exactly what he's going to choose in the next section. Any questions so far? Okay.
Well,
Chapter 1 eases in easy.
Meaning of Belshazzar?
Belshazzar. Oh, did I not have that one?
Maybe I missed it.
Oh, I didn't write that down. I missed that one. Sorry. Belshazzar. What? I'm trying to remember. I don't remember. I'll get it for next time.
Okay.
Or I'll post it, or I'll send out an email. Something. Okay. All right, next slide, verses 8 through 16. Here we get the Daniel diet. But Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the king's food, or with the wine that he drank. Therefore he asked the chief of the eunuchs to allow him not to defile himself. And God gave Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the chief of the eunuchs. And the chief of the eunuchs said to Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who assigned your food and your drink. For why should he see that you are in worse condition than the youth who are of your own age? So you would endanger my head with the king. Then Daniel said to the steward, whom the chief of the eunuchs had assigned over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. See, he refers personally to with their names. Test your servants for 10 days. Let us be given vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then let our appearance and the appearance of the youths who eat the king's food be observed by you, and deal with your servants according to what you see. So he listened to them in this matter and tested them for 10 days. At the end of 10 days, it was seen that they were better in appearance and fatter in flesh than all the youths who ate the king's food. So the steward took away their food and the wine that they were to drink and gave them vegetables. All right. Hence the Daniel diet. Does the Daniel diet work? Well, sure. If you eat all vegetables, guess what? You're probably going to lose weight. It's what we call a calorie deficit. It's pretty much all there is to it. What? Well, yeah. Well, that's another thing where, see, I've never looked into the Daniel diet because every time I hear about it, I roll my eyes. I always wonder about that. It's like, yeah, they actually got fatter. And the whole point of this is like it wasn't about the food. It was about God, yeah. Where it's like, you know what? I'm pretty sure God wanting to preserve his people and to save them, to bring the Messiah, is much different from God wanting you to be able to get up off the couch easier. These are very different goals. So, anyway. So Daniel, what we see here is right off the bat, Daniel kind of establishes himself as the de facto leader because he's the one who speaks up and says, like, okay, we don't want to defile ourselves with the king's food and with his wine. Possibilities for this is, well, first, eating unclean foods. Maybe they were eating bacon sandwiches. Delicious, but, not kosher. So they don't want to defy the kosher, the eating rules. Which, yeah, that works, although wine was permissible. So the fact that he doesn't want to drink the king's wine is kind of like, well, that's not okay. There could be a possibility that they wanted to avoid any possibility of eating food sacrificed to idols. We know in the New Testament, there's a lot of people who freak out about that. Paul deals with that quite a bit. Because that would be construed as, possibly accepting worship to those idols. So there's that. Although other things were offered to idols, not just meat. I mean, wine was offered, grains were offered, so likely these all kind of combined together. So it was Daniel's attempt to adhere to the laws of the Torah, wanted to avoid food sacrifice to idols. Also gives them, so wants to keep the laws of God, right? What would be if they refuse to eat? So the king says, eat this food, and they flat out refuse to eat it. Are they breaking any laws?
King's commandments.
What's that?
The king's commandment.
The king's commandment.
That's
You're breaking number 4. Honor thy father and mother. Honor the people in positions of authority over you, right? So this is one of those awesome places where you find yourself like, I want to keep all the commandments I possibly can, but to do so, I might have to break one of them. So they want to keep the first, certainly. And keeping the first, we're talking about, obeying God's word in all things. That means eating food, the right food, all this stuff. But they also want to keep that one. So how do you do it? Well, what does he do?
He got somebody else to break them.
He didn't really break the law, though, per se. I mean, a little bit. He worked a little bit. There was a little bit work in there, but he was very smart. I mean, and think about this. This is a teenager. This is a smart kid. And shows that, well, first of all, God is at work here. Because what does it say? God gave Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the chief of the eunuchs. So right from the get-go, we see God is still working. He's like, okay, I'll give you favor. So already, God has already kind of laid the groundwork where the chief of the eunuchs is already predisposed to be like, you know what, hey, this kid's all right, okay? So Daniel goes to him and asks, okay, can I not defile myself? Now, notice he's very tactful about it. He doesn't say no, we don't want this food. He doesn't raise a big stink about it, doesn't rail, just asks, can we not defile ourselves? Even wording it is like, okay, that's a very nice way to go about it, very reasonable, okay? And since he has favor, the chief of the eunuchs is like, my hands are tied, man. Because, if I allow this for you, and then the king sees that you lost weight and you look emaciated and malnourished because you're eating vegetables, because God, who would eat only vegetables? But he sees that you're malnourished, he's going to take it out on me because I'm in charge of you. So he's like, my hands are tied, there's nothing I can do. All right. So then what did Daniel do next?
Goes around him.
Goes right around him. Actually, it goes under him, right? So he goes, Daniel's very intelligent here. He's like, okay, there's always layers of authority. And so it comes from the king, so he goes to the steward. All right, well now, who's under the steward? The chief. Now he goes to the steward, whom the chief of the eunuchs had assigned. So the chief of the eunuchs signs the steward. And he goes to the steward and says, look, okay, he's worried about this all going through. So tell you what, trial run, just 10 days. 10 days, let us just eat our stuff, our vegetables. And you know what? And he says, if at the end of 10 days we're underfed, okay, you be the judge. But he puts it all on him and gives him the final say-so. So he's not making a grandstand. He's not making a huge deal. He's not saying he's not Martin Luther here. Here I stand. I will. I can do no other. He's a lot more chill. He's not German, so clearly. So he's a lot more like, hey, tell you what, let's just try this. Just a brief period of time. Now shows that he's very faithful and trusts that God will make things happen in 10 days. I mean, I know God works in his own time, and I've learned not to put a time frame on God when I ask him for stuff, because it never seems to work out for me. But he's convinced that in 10 days, God's going to do something. And sure enough, what happens? They're bigger than the other guys. So God is definitely working here. And so the steward and the beautiful thing is, he goes to the chief of the eunuchs, says, can we change our diet? No, can't do it. He hears that the concern is the appearance of the men. So he goes under him and says, look, we'll give it a shot. If it goes poorly, fine. If not, then we're good to go, right? And he's like, well, the steward is like, well, I just want to make my boss happy. So, okay, 10 days, it works. So he's like, great. As far as anybody's concerned, you're eating, we're good. You're getting your vegetables. Everything's awesome. Great. So they actually keep both of them. God works. Gives Daniel wisdom, tact, understanding. Clearly gives them plenty of calories, because I don't know what vegetables they were eating. Maybe they're deep fried. I don't know. Maybe a lot of ranch dressing. Who knows?
The other diet is fat.
Well, but it says they were fatter, though. I mean, so they.
No, that's
They were fatter in flesh, so you take the total condition of the whole body.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, it's only 10 days, though. I mean, come on, what happens in 10 days? I mean, I go to the gym for 3 months. I'm like, come on, man. Nothing happens. Now I do eat some cookies every once in a while. There's that. But so yeah, God grants this whole plan success. So yeah, the whole thing is about God being with his people, making this happen. It's not about the food. So for love of God, if anyone tries to convince you to take the Daniel diet, hey, if you want to be a vegetarian, more power to you. Go for it. But don't base it off of this. Because, I mean, really, if you really want to impress people, do the John the Baptist diet, because that's a lot more. I mean, the Daniel diet is easy. That's vegetables. People can live on vegetables. Eat honey and crickets all day long. See how that works for you. If you want to, if if you want a diet that expresses your faith, do the John the Baptist diet, and we'll see how that
They want
goes.
us to start doing that, you know?
Eating the insects, bugs or something.
It's good for the environment.
Okay. Whatever. It won't be in our lifetime, thank God. Pretty sure it'll be long after I'm gone, so I'm going to enjoy my burgers. I actually have freeze-dried crickets or locusts. Oh God, they're terrible. I've heard that you can get little seasonings from them. God, I ate one for the children's message, and a leg got stuck in my throat. I was gagging up. It was terrible. Anyway, moving along, verses 17 through 21. As for these 4 youths, God gave them learning and skill in all literature and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. At the end of the time, when the king had commanded that they should be brought in, the chief of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. And the king spoke with them, and among all of them none was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore they stood before the king. And in every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king required of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters that were in all his kingdom. And Daniel was there until the first year of King Cyrus. King Cyrus, king of Persia, who comes in and defeats Babylon and allows Judah to go back home. All right, so God blesses the men further. God gave them learning, skill, and all literature, wisdom, visions, and dreams for Daniel. So this is the 3rd time. So chapter 1 is very short, very concise. 3 times God blesses, or God gives something. He gave Jehoiakim into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, which we would say, ooh, judgment. Gave Daniel favor before the chief of the eunuchs, blessing. Gave learning, skill, and wisdom to the youths, blessing. But even in handing over Jehoiakim is blessing, because it is ultimately going to lead to Jesus. In a long, winding way, we're getting back to Christ. So, all the events in the lives of these young men were under God's control. God brought them out of Judah, allowed them to be pulled from Judah. He gave them favor in the sight of the people. He blessed them with wisdom, knowledge. He, so much so, and the gifts were apparent to everybody. So, Nebuchadnezzar was like, "Oh, you're better than 10 times better than anybody else. My magicians and enchanters." So they are truly outstanding guys, and these 4 are specifically outstanding. So they've been blessed to, they'll have a position of prominence in this pagan foreign land. So God is preserving them and placing them. And again, this is possible because they are very thoughtfully, shrewdly winding their way through. They have not rebelled. They've not rejected God. They're remaining faithful. They're keeping the commandments in a foreign land. They haven't given up God, but they are getting plugged in. They're in the world, but not of the world, to use a turn of a phrase. This is how it's done. Okay? There are times when you need to remain firm, and there are times when it's like just, it's a color of the carpet situation. It's like, in church, do we really need to argue about color of? No, we don't. Do we need to? Let's talk about. Should we have communion every week? Now there's a good argument. There's a good discussion we could have. What color the carpet is? Communion frequency? There's a fun conversation. There are good discussions to be had about that, and honestly, proper discussion, needful discussions. But Daniel is showing us that there are definitely ways to go about this.
You could argue that they circumvented, or I don't know what the right word is, but didn't really obey the king, because the king assigned them a daily portion of the food that the king ate and the wine that he drank.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely, it's depending on how you look at it.
Well, that's the kind of thing that we face, though.
Right.
In these situations, is making judgments about
What we consume.
yeah.
Not just food, but I mean everything.
No, yeah.
Yeah.
And what's the right thing to do?
Right.
What's the least wrong thing to do?
That's usually where we end up in, is choosing the lesser evil, right? Was there something?
Oh, just what you said about Martin Luther's approach of here I stand.
Right.
And to just say, boom, that's really kind of German culture approach.
It can be, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But to see the negotiation going on, I'm thinking of a friend of mine who happens to be Jewish, and his ability to work with the situation and be a peacemaker and
Right, right.
negotiate, and not just come at things like from my culture that says, no, it's this way, and you don't challenge authority and end
Right.
the discussion.
Right. Yeah, oh, that's absolutely. And kind of with that, with finding that way through and building on what you were saying there is, I mean, did Daniel keep these perfectly? No. I mean, he did the best he could, right? So, we could say that he definitely prioritized this one. Now, we could quibble on what it means to obey the king in that case. And, I mean, did he flat out obey the king? I'd say, well, no. As long as the king is saying, like, eat this. Now, I would say where he did with that, and kind of where we kind of look in how we deal with our culture and what is presented to us for consumption, is, we don't have to take in everything. We can politely decline things and be like, no, I'm not going to participate in that. But, kind of like, so making as far as food goes, Daniel did not make a crusade out of it. Like, I think you'll see in contemporary Christian circles, there's always a desire to make a crusade out of everything. Everything's a battle. And I don't think everything has to be. There are certain things where we can certainly say, like, hey, no, that's a hard no. That's a line. But there are a lot of things where we can say, you know what? This is messy. And so we're going to hold to this, and we're not going to give in to this, but we're also not going to, march through the streets and demand that you bow down to me and my commandments. See, that's kind of interesting thing. They're not evangelizing, really. I mean, you could say, well, they're living out their life, and well, yeah, they are. But they're not like handing out Torahs to the Babylonians. They're not on the street corners, with their tracts. They're just being quietly faithful. And to the Babylonians, are they seeing this? Are they recognizing this? Like, probably not. I mean, they're exiles. Of course, they're going to have different ways of doing things anyway. They're foreigners. The point for Daniel is not evangelization. It is simply steadfast faith.
And what I read is I see who's really in authority
Mm-hmm.
over Daniel. And he doesn't, he knows that he's there with the king, but that's not his higher authority.
Right.
So.
Yeah, God is.
Is that even an issue at that point? Because he doesn't do him.
Right. I mean, he's got to work under Nebuchadnezzar. He's got to kind of navigate it. But he's not trying to overthrow. He's not trying to, agitate, anything like that. Yeah. And the beautiful thing as we go further in is that what happens is, well, Nebuchadnezzar relies on Daniel, and interpretation of visions, and the other kings also. As Nebuchadnezzar dies, and the next king, and so forth, they will, they ask Daniel, what does this vision mean? And it's beautiful because he gives them reckoning of the vision, and it's pointing to Christ. Now, they might not realize it. So, I mean, he's speaking the word of God to them. Now, for them, it's just like, whew. But I mean, he's faithful. So he's doing his obedience to God in all things, but he's still working within the system. And so, yeah, it's a tricky thing because there are those who would advocate that Christians need to fully pull back from our pagan society. We need to withdraw. We need to, kind of barricade. There's some, no, we have to be fully out there and engaged in trying to remake this society. It's like, there are other options. It's not just one or the other. You know, there's this nice little Lutheran path in the middle where we're like, I don't know, Lord have mercy. Forgive me, and I do my best.
Why didn't Daniel close his window when he was praying later on so he could avoid the lion's den?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of stuff. So yeah, I mean, there are different. I mean, this is definitely not a lion's den issue. So you know, he doesn't want to make a big show of it. It's like this is not the important thing. Now the lion's den, we're going to deal with something a little bit bigger, and so there are points where it's going to be on display a little bit more. And certainly, yeah, the lions, the fiery furnace. I mean, these are big kind of shows. Now, of course, the result was, did Babylon convert? No. But, you know, it's the exile was not, you know, the intent was not, hey, let's convert Babylon. The exile was, hey, let's preserve a remnant. Let's keep a core who are going to return, who are going to reestablish, and from there is going to come my son. So for Daniel, you know, what was the lion's den was a furnace for Babylonians, or was it for the people of Israel, or the people of Judah who were there? You know, probably more for them to be like, oh my gosh, that was Yahweh. Oh, he's okay. He's still with us. He's still with us. We can maintain, you know, protecting the faithful. Now that is kind of, you know, so he's really treading that line between kind of protecting and being apart from, but also being in. And there's a lot of dance in there. And that's what we do.
A really interesting thing about Scripture is because you can see that God is there on so many different levels.
Oh yeah. Oh well.
I mean, the plan is. I mean, there's no way you can make somebody fat in 10 days. Okay, let's just.
Oh, I went on a cruise.
Crazy, you know, and then so the part about the window. I mean, it's not. I don't think that everything here Daniel was controlling.
True.
This is God's plan.
Right.
And you see the thread through Daniel's life, obviously. And
Yes. But yeah, you can't get fat in 10 days. Because
so-
we were on a 10-day cruise. Of course, I did not eat vegetables. Probably at all, honestly.
Well,
So it was different. But to that point, actually, you know, this is the great thing about this. So at the very end of chapter 1, we have these young men, teenagers, these young men who amaze people by their surpassing knowledge and wisdom. And Daniel is kind of standing up as one to kind of lead the way for his people, to show them the path back to God, right? Well, what does this remind us of? Jesus in the temple as a young boy, amazing everybody with his knowledge and wisdom. The one who is bringing his people back to Yahweh. So yeah, God's is woven throughout this whole thing. Not just that he's giving away things and all that, but he's broadcasting Jesus. Until I mean, good Lord, he shows up in the fiery furnace. He literally shows up. So yeah, he's all over. You can't shake the stick without hitting Jesus somewhere. It's always a fun illustration. All right, so yeah, Daniel chapter 1. Daniel's easy. People make it so hard, but it's like, this is easy stuff. Any questions or comments?
I like the word you used earlier, assimilate, that this book shows us how to assimilate. And whether this is our culture here or the other side of the world, wherever God plants us, this is how we assimilate wherever we go.
Well, and the whole aspect of knowing, of being brought up in the knowledge of the Babylonians of Babylon, is that if you want to reach out to people, you got to know who you're reaching out to. And like assimilate, you know, it's almost a dirty word to Christianity. We don't want to assimilate with the culture. It's like, well, to a degree, yeah, but we need to know who we're dealing with, because you can't share the gospel with somebody unless you really know what's going on. I mean, well, you can, but I mean, if you want the greater likelihood that they'll hear it, that they'll receive it, you know, it helps that you're sensitive to their needs, their desires, their wants, their whatever. You know, so you don't say something stupid that's going to immediately offend them, and instead you're going to, you know, be able to work within that framework. So that's another good lesson from this. Is like, you know what? It's good to know the culture that you're in. I mean, it might not be fun finding out what that culture is all about and what some of this stuff is, but it's useful to know. You can't expect to reach people if you don't know who you're trying to reach.
Some ways this seems similar to Joseph going into Egypt.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And God was obviously working all that way. So yeah, what you see, and the beautiful thing about Scripture is just, it's the same thing over and over and over again. Over and over and over. And then you get to Jesus, and he does the same stuff that was already throughout the Old Testament. It's just, he does it right. He finally does stuff that he doesn't have to do it over and over again. He does it right. Even the beauty of like feeding the 5,000. Where we had, we're going to talk about it Sunday, where in Sunday school we talked, oh, that's right, we didn't stream it. We talked about the manna in the wilderness, you know, and how that was like, you know, God provided manna in the wilderness. Well, Jesus fed the 5,000. He does that. He feeds his people technically twice. He feeds the 5,000, then he feeds 4,000. Same thing, except different people, different areas. 5,000 was in the area of the Jews. 4,000 was in the area of Gentiles. So he's still doing things kind of once and completing things, but he's doing it for all people. There's a lot of good stuff going on. So yeah, good stuff. All right. See, I don't have Alex coming in to force me to end on time. All right, well, that's it for tonight. So thank you all for being here. Thank you for coming. Thank you online. Have a good night.